All right. Life Unraveled. Dr. Sean Huss.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, no problem.
We were talking about tons of cool stuff before the podcast, like all podcasts.
Sure.
We should have recorded that. But we were just kind of riffing on junior high cliques and stuff, I guess.
Yeah,
At least that's what I was riffing on. So you're sociology professor.
I am.
Arkansas Tech University.
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been working at Tech?
I think this is my 14th year.
Nice. I think you were maybe, when I went through there, were maybe finishing up grad school or something.
Yeah, I came ABD, so I was a lunatic when I first came. I was, screaming at everybody because I had so much going on. And finally finished and calmed down. So
yeah, I will say at that time I was like, man, this would have been like 2007 or something that I took sociology as a freshman. I made an A.
Good.
Which I was very proud of.
Good.
But I really enjoyed that class. Like, I remember we watched that Hurricane Katrina documentary, which I've watched one time since, and just that class in general, I got super interested in sociology, and luckily, I work right across the hall from one at UACCM, and we chat periodically. Dane Blanchard's his name. And then Jesse Weiss was at U of O, but he just moved off to Nebraska. He's been on the podcast a couple of times. So, but what got you interested in sociology?
Well, it's kind of weird. I mean, it's part of my life story. I have a weird life story in general, but I was an accounting marketing major for a long time, and then I got bored with school. As an undergrad, I went to Euler, got bored, decided I was going to take a couple of years off and then come back and finish. So I worked in the corporate world for a while. In the accounting offices for Southern Pacific. So I was at their corporate headquarters.
Wow.
I wasn't an accountant proper, but I was in charge of stuff. I was in charge of loss and damage, freight claims, and so a lot of money counting and things like that. And those experiences, they just weren't fulfilling the way I wanted them to be. I think I'd made the decision for accounting and marketing to be more rational. Obviously, you're always going to have a job. The pay is going to be good. And, working with those people, they were fun people, but, it was always the bottom line. And so you never counted people, you never worried about people. It was always this sort of macro kind of monetary decisions. And what I ended up doing was I took classes to fill my nights because, I lived in the Bay Area, and spending money in the Bay Area is a problem, but you could get community college classes super cheap.
Yeah.
So I went to Diablo Valley Community College, and I started taking sociology and anthropology classes just for the fun of it. And it was there and then I said, all right, that's what I want to do. So I kind of dropped out from the private sector for a while. I ended up studying in a Taoist temple, kind of centering myself. And then after that, I went back to Euler and finished in sociology and anthropology. So I got 2 degrees, and from there I jumped to the University of Tennessee to go to sociology. But it was really more about, it seemed to fit better. It helped me understand the world better, and it fit with my explanations. It was one of those things. It was more like a calling. You know how when people get called to the ministry or whatever?
Yeah, you finally found what
that was it.
What it is for you. Yeah,
that was it. So I can still count things, but
don't you teach stats?
I do. I teach stats.
Well, that's helpful. I guess. Yeah. Is that the norm for sociology? They teach
a lot of social people have backgrounds in statistics. Mine's a little bit different, and I have more of a stats background than most sociologists have.
I can see that. Yeah, for
sure. Most social people have to go through the meat grinder of statistics.
Yeah.
But I think a lot in our department are really what we would call qualitative. So I'm sort of the quant guy, I'm the number counter.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's an interesting compliment, because statistics is that out of most of behavioral sciences departments, but it's a thing that a lot of degrees have to take, right? Accounting and business.
Oh,
degrees.
yeah. And in different departments will have different stats classes, but it's all essentially the same stat stuff. The differences will be in the examples that you use in class and the data sets you use. So in our classes, we'll use some generic sets, but sometimes they're more oriented towards psych or soc. But it's all the same techniques, basically.
For sure. I remember when I took the class, which I never had a class in statistics, but when I took the class on logic, some accounting folks and stuff I talked to, it seems like there might be some crossover concepts there, because I remember taking Logic with Bush, and it changed the way I was deep into martial arts at the time, and I would spend like hours writing my combos out, and like it changed me to this real pattern, organizational oriented, organize the information in this logical way, you know. And I've always had kind of a slight interest in stats. What I would like to do, I've talked with a couple folks about this. I've been plotting stats from UFC for some time. I had the UFC encyclopedia, so that allows me to look at, it only goes through 2011, but I've been working on it for a couple of years, and I haven't even got 93 or whatever it is through 2011. But you can do every card. And okay, this was Americana, this was a decision, this was a second round TKO via a punch. So I'm trying to line up these things, so in theory I could apply them to my coaching. Right, but it's a very I need student workers and stuff, man.
That's right.
You don't have those at the
RA
community college.
Research assistant.
Yeah. So you guys got advising coming up?
Yeah, advising's coming up. We're actually starting it now.
Yeah, I start tomorrow. So it's like my second time to do it, and I was like 19 appointments. I'm just like, all right.
Yeah, it's like that, you know.
Yeah. How many advisees do you have, out of curiosity, for my own selfish
honestly,
inquiry?
I've never counted. I usually get ballpark 30.
Yeah.
You know, somewhere in there.
That seems to be like most. I'm still getting the light load, so I don't know what to look forward to.
You got to ease into it.
Yeah,
so
they were like, "Hey, you're not going to advise the first year, but here's 9 advisees your second time." You know, and that was the easing into it. But it really, I could see there were 5 of the people that I dealt with last semester, so they were just rollovers, couple of updates, and look at the transcript. So. Plus, like, I'm kind of got this on my mind because tomorrow's the Tool concert.
Oh yeah.
So you like Tool at all? Have you listened to the album?
Tool. I'm not a huge Tool fan, but I like them.
Yeah,
I do.
There's a funny joke going around right now. Maynard says it at the shows, and there's a meme. It's like, Tool, no quarter. If you're younger than 30, we wrote this song. Super funny, but they, I hope they do something like play No Quarter. I've seen them play once, and honestly, it was like 3 or 4 years ago. I wasn't impressed at all. I went in, I'm like, man, I've always wanted to see Tool. I was getting more so into their music than any time previously, because as a real listening to it as a senior in high school when their last album came out, I didn't get hardly anything. Like, I didn't even know who Carl Jung was. And then Maynard, to find out on the back end how much of his stuff is inspired by Jung's writings and
the Jungian
archetype. Yeah. Fascinating. Super fascinating. But that seems to be what's setting the internet on fire right now. It's the new Tool album.
Yeah.
Stereotypically.
I hear it's good. I haven't listened to it yet. But.
All of the songs are like 13 minutes plus or something like that. There's not a song on there that's less than 10 minutes that has lyrics. Now, Danny Carey did some weird... almost like intermissions. You'll have like 2 songs. It's like half an hour. And then he'll do this weird drum intermission solo thing with, there's one where it's real digital. It's like, and he'll do, and the electronic part just compounds and starts taking some weird.
Right.
It's like trying to, I was driving down the road listening to one of the songs the other day, and I was trying to wrap my head around it, and I couldn't. I was just like trying to chase down a beat to follow, and they kept changing the tempo, and I was like, man, this is interesting. I mean, how they do the timing signatures and stuff. So it's
sounds like they're going even more experimental. I mean, I'll have to listen to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. We having the podcast, we just did an album review on the pod. We just listened to it on the podcast.
Yeah.
So it's always it's a good time. But man, I got interested in having you on because we were actually, you come to this in the gym audience quite frequently, and you know, we've established that you like awesome music.
I do.
What are you going to that Todd? You listen to Todd Snyder at all? Are you going to that show coming up?
No.
Did we talk about that?
No, I don't think you may have mentioned Todd Snyder.
See, I wasn't into him forever, but he's related to like virtually everyone else that you and I have talked about. Played with. I just saw Panic at the Ryman in Nashville a few weeks ago. He sat in with them one night.
Oh wow, yeah.
Played an old Mikey Hauser song that Hauser wrote about his son before he died. How Mikey Hauser, first Panic guitar player, and died. And but man, he's like a folk guy, but he's coming to Fort Smith. I've been around since I was in high school, and I never got into him. But he's an interesting cat. He was in that band Hardworking Americans too.
That sounds familiar.
Now they're more electric. He just plays an acoustic guitar and a harmonic. He's kind of like a train hopping Bob Dylan
that's
persona
cool too. I mean, it seems like some of that's kind of making a comeback lately too. With the stripped down sounds. I really like that.
What's some stuff you like listening to?
Well, it depends. If I'm working or doing stats, usually it's punk. That loud thrashing sort of stuff. Yesterday afternoon, we were sitting around out back, and I made everybody listen to Gordon Lightfoot all day. So, just sitting around out back. So it really depends on what the mood strikes. My tastes are really eclectic, and I think it's part, like we were talking about my band background. There's not really one genre that I like better than all the others. I just kind of, in general, if it catches my attention, then I listen to it. So I'll listen to rap, hip hop. I listen to everything.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. I was listening to Tom Morello talk the other day, which is such an interesting guy. Harvard graduate.
Oh yeah.
Went to ironically, I just found this out. Graduated the same high school with Tool's guitar player.
Really?
And they lived together after high school.
Yeah.
When Tom Morello was a Harvard graduate and couldn't get a job. But he was talking about, he's like, yeah, man, like one of my number one inspirations, like Dr. Dre.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I could see that.
I mean, I could too, but just hearing him say it, he's been doing a lot of this is something I've even participated, but online learning for music is
that's pretty
so much more. I've never got into playing leads or scales outside of just some that I had acquired through playing the bass. But when I played rhythm guitar for years, played guitar since junior high, and have as an adult started teaching myself scales, and I'm like, I dream about the logical patterns. They're just it's interesting. So
2, 3, 1, 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, then I'm going to go to that second major, chord in the key,
pentatonic, and then the minor.
See, I've been working my way just through the major scales, starting with the key of G, and I'm going to go the minors. So but it's I've learned a lot, and it's interesting how it's changed my playing in all these subtle ways. Because I'll pick up a guitar or something, and I'll play something, and I've never played that before. And I wonder how much of the connection is to I learned a new song last week, or I picked up these new scales, I thought about these chords in order, and then I played them in a different formation. The patterns are what keeps me engaged on it, though.
Well, and that's when I was learning them, one of the things that struck me, at least on the guitar, was the Mixolydian. Which is the Grateful Dead scale, we always called it. And so once you get into that, you start to see it, and that's where I started seeing the connection between the major and even the minor and some of these others, just in the pattern itself, and like you say, it's the patterns. So for instance, if I'm playing and goofing around on guitar with some buddies and it's my turn to take the lead, I'm less focused on what the notes are than the patterns that I know that will work in that key.
I just turned that corner in recent months, and really, man, what allowed me to do that was getting on my own without having to jam with other folks so much. Was getting a decent looper pedal.
Yeah.
I was like, I am the rhythm guitar player, so I would just lay down something simple, and then I would pick the scale that would work, and the shapes and patterns and different shapes as you move down. That's there's something that I've cued in. A bunch of people are talking about it, and I thought this one guy had come up with it that I watch on YouTube all the time, named Marty Schwartz. But there's apparently this system, the caged system, where that's like an acronym. It's for the CAG.
Sure,
But it allows you to kind of really encompass everything up and down the neck, just ascending, descending. And I just started looking at that a few days ago. I kept hearing about it. But you are you a Dead fan?
Off and on, yeah. I mean, when I was younger, I was a huge fan. I still like their music, and occasionally I'll still put it on. But my go-tos are a little bit different now. But yeah, I went and saw them live a few times.
Oh wow,
all kinds of things.
When Jerry was still alive?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Once when he was alive.
What are your thoughts on? Man, I love O'Teal Burbridge, who plays with Bob Weir and Dead and Company. But what are your thoughts on that? I know it's a pretty controversial
in terms
act.
of what, Dead and Company?
Dead and Company having John Mayer in the band. Let's just come out and say it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get what they're doing. You know, I think they're, you know, in many respects, it's a lot of fan service to continue it. It's an effort to keep that culture alive, and that culture was very important, even historically, in this country for a while. At the same time, that's kind of where I stopped. I mean, you know, it's I did go see Bob Weir in the Breakout Band, so I've seen like Mickey Hart and Planet Drum, Bob Weir, the Jerry Garcia Band after he died. I still saw some of those acts, but I don't know, just never had the same magic. Rat Dog was close. That's Bob Weir's first band, I think, that he spun out on. But yeah, you know, continuing, I've listened to them. They're okay. But that's about where I leave.
They do. I was just listening to a live show they play. I don't even remember where it was. Just on YouTube, sitting back here researching and just hanging out. And I mean, they get down. I mean, it's a lot of the set list. It's the nostalgia, but they jam too, and it's hard not to lie. I definitely appreciate him. I've never been a big John Mayer fan, but
me neither. Honestly,
I mean, but. Honestly, just because I'm not a fan of his music, the dude is super talented.
Oh, you know, there are a lot like Justin Timberlake. I think he's brilliant.
Oh yeah.
Don't listen to his music really, but he's brilliant. You know?
He's even a great. I mean, that guy does everything.
Oh, I know.
Singing, dancing, acting. He's a great actor.
Yeah, and so you know, I think we can appreciate the quality of somebody's performance or whatever without actually being fans. I mean, so, and that's kind of where I am now. Just going back to the original question, that's probably where I am. I mean, would I find it nostalgic to listen to Terrapin Station? Sure. But at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, there's something else missing.
Yeah, it's like I'm in a couple of the panic groups on the internet, and people will this big post went out the other day with somebody being like, oh, you think you're cool because you're 30 and you listen to the Dead now? It's the most tired thing ever. I just went on this huge rant about how because I mean, I got like a pair of Grateful Dead Chacos. Like that's the full circle it's gone, and this person's like seen the whole thing, seen Jerry live, and they're like, yeah, you cute, you guy with the Grateful Dead Chacos. I mean, I've seen Panic like 25 times, and the Panic fans are like, oh, it's very sweet and innocent of you to go see him that many times. Seen him 300. Like one time, this guy we just hung out with at the show was like, this is my like 319th show, man. I was like,
yeah.
That's on another level.
I have a buddy I did with Panic in particular. He used to follow Panic around and then cook the grilled cheese in the parking lot and everything. I would go occasionally with him to go see Panic. I always liked him, but this guy, it's a religion to him.
Some of them are on.
He's plugged in with the Dead and the recording groups, so he gets all these shows from way back. You know, I mean, he trades shows, does all kinds of wild stuff, and for him, I mean, that's his primary life. His job is just a side gig, you know, just to pay the bills.
Yeah, I could see that. Man, this has become a huge thing. I guess it kind of always has been, but tapers. Mm-hmm. People will get like a nice Tascam, get 60 foot from the stage, put it up on a boom, and then they will either sell, trade, or upload, or have a get a free ticket to tape for... And a lot of times the bands are doing that, but there's these apps that have come out, like the Re-Listen app. Mm-hmm. This app I have on my phone, it has like every Fish, Panic, just you name it, jam bands mostly, but there's not a lot of stuff on there that outside of that sort of genre. Mm-hmm. But man, I can listen to every Panic show I've ever been to, and we do. Yeah. Yeah. It's like reliving it, and like, man, I was there. I remember for a long time, I was like, man, the digital age is kind of a super negative thing. And I remember like being like realizing that I could listen to all the shows I'd ever been to from this band I really care about, and I was like, no, that's a definite benefit.
Yeah, it is.
But it is it's it's kind of hard to find the benefits sometimes with all the social media
it's
and
commercialized. It's sometimes the fan service gets a little too commercial at the same time. I mean, I'm trying not to be too negative, but because too many people are negative about it. I think it's just it's the way our society is changing, and I think there are positive things like you're talking about with this availability of these recordings. So, for instance, I was at Big Cypress for Fish, the 2K turnover, and I occasionally I'll get on and listen to that, just to go all the way back to that momentous occasion where I was in a hot air balloon above the concert right as the new year hit.
Wow.
I mean, it was it's something that helps you remember and try to experience those things again.
Yeah, it's just a sort of a weird nostalgia, I guess you could say, but it totally unavailable before this time period.
Yeah,
that we know
it was
about.
almost. I was surprised when I saw that show on there. I said, I'm going to listen to this. Not on that app, but I've gotten it elsewhere.
Well, I mean, just YouTube. I mean, in general, like there are a few songs, like when Panic came through Arkansas, that their videographer, Andy Tennell is his name, he uploaded some high quality videos from the amp, from Walmart amp, and they're on Panic's official channel, and they'll be there probably forever, the whole time channel's up. So go back and watch its high quality video too, HD, and audio's awesome and professionally shot and edited. So that too. I mean, YouTube is a game changer.
Oh, it is.
I listen to podcasts, but my little commute to Morrilton was like 25 minutes. But man, I watch or listen to YouTube documentaries in the background all the time, or audiobooks. A lot of audiobooks are on YouTube as well. So it's a nice feature. We do a lot of YouTubing for the gym, so I'm on there all the time.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out too.
So what, do you have any commentary on any social, political issues as a sociologist?
It depends on the issue. I mean, there'll be points where you can't shut me up.
Okay. Well, here's one I was thinking about today. Two of my friends posted about it, and I was like, well, it's interesting. Maybe I'll ask Huss about it, ironically, since it's a social sort of issue, but public education. Public schools and lunch shaming, free or reduced lunches, you're paying, you're not paying, your parents make too much, all these sort of rules. And I just never really thought about it recently, but what are your thoughts on us even charging for lunch?
I think it's ridiculous. I think it should be part of the the free program. I think it reflects part of the reason they do that. I assume, I haven't obviously looked into it, but I know they have food service providers, which means they're outsourcing the contracts to private industry.
Yes, okay.
That, along with charter schools and some of these other things, I think reflect a tendency in our culture to push more toward the private sector for solutions, because they feel the public sector doesn't provide solutions. It only provides problems, and it's costly. But that is so different than the way we used to think. It used to be that we really had faith in our institutions, or more faith. People are always critical. And at the same time, we understood that there are things that are public goods that should be sacrosanct. They should be treated as public goods. And the problem when you take a public good and you put it under the accountability of a corporate entity is you take a system where you can participate and have input, and you turn it over to an unaccountable tyranny. So now if you're looking at a food service or in a school, there's very little that you can do to try to reduce those costs or do those things. I mean, they're susceptible to public pressure, obviously, but they're part of the problem. I mean, that's the issue.
Well, and I've seen, just thinking back, this has been going around, but some communities have started like we have the Main Street Mission or the
Sure.
different nonprofits here locally, but has started donating because I mean, on top of this, the waste that was the second thing.
Oh yeah,
that
that's
popped in.
yeah, it's insane. We I was part of the group that started the food recovery programs at Tech, and we were plugged into all the networks, and I can tell you that we were collecting thousands of pounds per week that was just going to be thrown away, that we were redistributing to Main Street Mission, Mana House, St. John's Pantry, a lot of stuff we were sending over to River Valley Food for Kids, as long as canned goods, etc. That was a student-led initiative that, we had 300 students involved. And
wow, is that still going on?
All that. Well, what ended up happening was, without sounding too controversial, they started changing things about how civic engagement would occur at Tech, and they, quite honestly, they didn't come and talk to us. And when they made those changes, it made our program it undermined our program. And so what we decided to do, and when I say our, it was James Stobaugh and I kind of helped the students do this. So what we decided to do was to step aside and institutionalize it, to give it to a program at the university. And so Honors Program took it over, and we gave them all the resources we could do, and we still help them out now and again. But they just lost the energy and drive. And so the food recovery program shut down, but we also started the campus pantry, and so the campus pantry is still running.
We have one of those as well, and I didn't realize how much it got accessed.
Oh, yeah. No, that's...
and we're a meager 1,800 students or something. I mean, were you guys at 15,000 yet?
I think we're still at 12, 13,000.
Okay, I remember it was around 10 when I graduated with my bachelor's or master's was just a year or so apart. So,
but the problems of students now are different than the problems of students in the past. So, for instance, if you're talking about economic insecurity and food insecurity, I mean, these students come in and they have very real needs that that's different. There used to be, I can put it this way, there used to be this sort of cultural nugget that would float around that, you're supposed to be poor while you're a college student. And it's that story is no longer the same story, so it's no longer character building. It's really demoralizing, and it's real serious economic and food insecurity. And so when people pass it off, we even testified before the state legislature about this, and they pass it off as sort of, oh, well, everybody's supposed to be poor. And we're saying, no, you don't understand what this is. Part of what sparked the pantry idea, more so than the food recovery, was the fact that we had students in classes who would disclose that they weren't able to get a meal, and that we had students who were living in their cars. And
that's something I've seen Vice documentaries about.
Yeah, I mean, I teach a class on stratification, and part of what I try to do in the class is I try to get them not to engage in poverty tourism, which is a lot of programs you see on campuses, like they come in, they say, come experience poverty, and it's a canned program that student services will often buy. They'll come in, and they're sort of offensive, because it creates this ethos of poverty tourism where you're not really poor. Let's go see how the real bad sort of experiences are, and they don't really learn anything, and mostly because they're already there and even worse off. So that, even the way administrations work sometimes is they still operate like college students have money, and they don't. But we were just having a conversation. I'm teaching strat this semester as well, and they're still ashamed of things like, for instance, their student loan debt. And so just getting students to talk about their student loan debt is like pulling teeth. But once you get them talking, they start to realize they all have student loan debt. And one of them talks about how she works with food services because she gets a free meal a day, and somebody else comes on and says that, hey, that's why I work at this place. And you start to realize that the students now are really, if we were honest about it, are really poor. And so when we saw that, we said that the pantry may act as a stopgap to some of this. So the pantry's open. You can go anytime. They don't ask your name. You just have to have an active ID.
Yeah.
And
does this faculty donate to that pantry? Is it local?
Faculty donate. We also help. Jan Jenkins is.
Yeah, I almost asked if Dr. Jenkins is still around the honors program.
She runs it now, but we were able to help her get that 10,000 pound donation from Tyson.
Okay.
So, like I said, we're still sort of loosely involved. But going back to the issue, I mean, that's the issue, and that's really sort of the tragedy that that we see, is that they become ashamed and they personalize the problem when it's actually a public issue. And there's a tendency in our culture to make people feel ashamed that they are in just bad circumstances, when in many respects they may not have done anything wrong.
That's it's funny you say all this, because when I was thinking about this earlier, in my head I was like, yeah, it's so wrong in high school. I mean, I could see it in college, because you're supposed to be I literally thought that today before we had this conversation. I was like, well, I could see it in college, cafeteria, blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. You got to pay for college, so cost of living goes up. But it's like, at what point are wages increasing to help deal with that? I mean, I remember when
wages aren't keeping up. I mean, if I'd known, I'd have brought you all these charts. I mean, it's clear wages are not keeping up with productivity.
I want to have Kristen Foster on the podcast.
Yeah,
she's got a lot of great stats on a lot of stuff we're chatting about. Mm-hmm. I mean, Nathan George has been on once before, and I don't know if I can get both of them on at the same time. I would like to, though, than that, and I just don't have enough ladies on the podcast. Mm-hmm. I need to stop doing dudes and just do like a whole month of women. I'm trying to get Danielle Hausnick on, talk about some stuff.
There's Women's Month coming up, right? So you can just do it then.
I could do that. Yeah. A little gimmick, but a needed one. So a little diversity on the conversating. Yeah, man, that's we're so on the political debate on this. Are there political fixes to? I mean, Bernie Sanders would say we need to do away with this student debt. We need to do away with. So that's on one end of the spectrum, is using democratic socialism to combat the problem, and the other, I guess, end of the spectrum would be there is no problem. Mm-hmm. What's somewhere in the middle of that?
Well, I think in the middle, if you look at some of the proposals, like Elizabeth Warren's is okay. I'm not sure exactly how everything gets paid for yet, but I think it's difficult in our society and in our system, which defends to its death the capitalist model, that solutions in Bernie Sanders' approach, which is, we're just going to absorb this. You have to build in some of the capitalist model, and that's where Elizabeth Warren sort of falls in. So, at least what I've seen of her plan, it's absolve upwards of $50,000 in debt. Another guy comes along and says that you should provide tax credits for those who have already paid off their loans. I don't think we have a plan perfectly in the middle yet, but at least they're having the conversation, and I think they're right. I mean, student loans, a lot of the studies that I've been reading lately indicate that student loans cause people to delay having children, to actually not buy homes, not buy cars, not engage in the typical sort of practices that keep our economy running, because money is supposed to be spent. But when you have these bottlenecks and you have this sort of top-down approach, this trickle-down approach, money gets sort of sucked up to the top, and the people who would spend more don't have it. And we've got an entire set of cohorts who have come out with so much student loan debt that they just don't do what others have done in the past that drove the economy. So we're getting to a crisis moment, I think. Did you have to take out student loans? Oh yeah, no. I usually tell my students they're rookies. I've got $110,000 in student loans.
Okay, I think I was over 50, and then by the time the interest added up, by the time I was able to have enough income to start substantially throwing money back at them, we've paid one off since I've been working at the university. But I mean, like what you just said, Corey and I, that's the reason we haven't had. I mean, we had a plan. All right, we're going to wait to get married, and why we're waiting is so we're not financially destitute, and then we're going to wait until this and our education. I get my master's degree and career and everything. It's like having a kid is at the very last. That's where we're at.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people choose not to even get married. So, for instance, in, let's say, my age range, I'm divorced, but, getting married again becomes an issue only because of the student loans. Because, so, for instance, my girlfriend has student loans. I have student loans. And if we get married, that changes our income. And the way the rules work, our payments automatically go up.
Yeah.
Because they count two incomes unless we file income separately, so we can file income taxes independently from one another, right? And when you do that, you take a hit on your return, you take a hit on all these other factors. So the system is ultimately set up to kind of screw people over who have student loans, and student loans can't be absolved through bankruptcy. I mean, you've got them until you die. Is
that on the table for discussion about the bankruptcy? I've been hearing more talk about it just in the, I guess it's probably going to be more of an issue in the election. Everybody's kind of talking about student loan debt, but
I don't know that they could, because it would require so many people to declare bankruptcy. I mean, so for instance, if we could absolve them through bankruptcy, then I could easily go down and argue that I am so underwater that I am bankrupt. I mean, I could. So between that and my house note, I've got, $250,000 in debt. And even though I'm a full professor, I'm not making anywhere close to be able to afford that. So I'm on like income-based repayment.
That's what we did for a minute. And my interest was...
Yeah, no, they don't stop ticking the interest.
Yeah.
At one point, I even defaulted. I mean, here's the other thing that and I try to tell my students this, that when I got out of graduate school, the pay here was so low that I could not pay my rent and pay my student loan payments. And so I had to choose, which one am I going to default on? And so I default, because it's like there's an old saying, rent eats first. I had to pay my rent and I had to pay my living expenses, like.
I know somebody else that has that same story. I mean, probably close to the same age as you and everything. And man, I mean, things happen. Spouse loses a job.
Yep.
I was reading a study the other day talking about people that were homeless that were not losers or anything. It's like, I had a good paying job, and then I broke my leg, and it's a total fluke accident, and then I got fired from my job 3 months later, and because I had to miss all this work, and they had to let me go, and yada yada yada, and end of story, they're homeless, and they couldn't really do anything. Family members dying, and just not having anyone to kind of help you back.
Well, there are these other things that there's an entire industry that's set up on preying on people who are economically vulnerable too. So you got the rent-a-centers, the check cashing places, those kinds of things that ultimately you end up paying 3 times the value of a thing by renting it at a smaller price over the course of the 3-year period. I mean, all these things are sort of designed to screw you over, but at the same time, they still need things. If you look at this area, for instance, one of the things I've always argued with the civic leaders is that we need a bus line. That if they want to deal adequately with some of the issues that the poor face, you need a bus line. Mostly because in this area, you have to drive to get to your work. There's no bus line. There's nothing no public system that kind of gets you there. So, for instance, we ran into one couple, and they came to us for help, and we had to direct them to other services because Tech Pantry was just for tech people. But they had legitimate work. They had all these things, and they got talked into buying a truck that was beyond their level, but they always figured, well, we'll have our jobs and we'll be able to afford it. We'll just live tight for a while. And what ended up happening was they lost everything because the husband lost his job. And so they couldn't afford anything, and so they ended up living in the truck. And so you'd see them pull up to pantries in this, $60,000 truck, and people would say, "How dare they? I can't believe them. They have a nice car. That car costs more than mine," and without understanding their actual story, and that is they got rooked. They got rooked into spending beyond their means, and that's what I meant earlier about the capitalist model and sort of the problems with it. There are problematic features of our system that we never address. And, well, that's one of them, that there are these wants and there are these desires that are sort of culturally imposed upon us, and as long as we believe we can be economically secure, we make what appear to be rational choices, but things happen, and we don't plan for that. And that's where that family was, and several families we've dealt with. They just found themselves in a bad place, but it looks bad when they pull up in the fancy truck.
Yeah, that's. I worked in the car business. I could totally see that. I mean, and if I didn't know how to take caution in buying a new vehicle, like when I bought that Subaru, it's been like 18 months ago or something, but. That luckily I knew the owner of the dealership and all these other things, and was just like, got a good deal out the gate, but like trading everything in, financing, having done all that. But I mean, how many people know? Obviously, I'm gonna tell you, not that many people do. That's why I got out of work in the car business, because I felt bad for the people like you're talking about. Yeah. Sales manager doesn't care, rip their heads off.
No, because that's how they make their money.
Well, and two, it puts you in a weird spot in sales. It's a salesperson, because I felt bad about that a lot of times, because my model was like, you guys pay me $200 a car, I'm gonna sell like 18 cars this month. That's a decent amount of income. I'm happy with that. I'm gonna go for volume. But it would just like put me in the spot where like the customer's like, man, I can't afford that. Like that's gonna make me economically destitute. And then I go tell that to sales manager. He's like, do you want to make money or not? You need to go in there and rip their head off. And I'm just like, it puts you, it's a weird moral conflict, but it's like, that's the design of that business.
Yeah, no, I would say that it's not even really a moral conflict, because the morality is more in line with what you're talking about, and that is do the right thing, which is help them out. But we have this tendency, and it's almost like an infection. It infects other aspects of our life when we think in terms of this rational market system. And so the rational market system is, well, you made the choice, you have to live with the consequences. It's not my job to help you make your financial decisions. So put differently, screw them over if you can, because that's how you get yours. It's a very selfish orientation. And it's not uncommon that you see that in all sorts of corporate entities. I mean, it's probably part of what drove me out when I was working in the corporate world. And, that sort of, we tend to think markets operate on a kind of morality, but they don't. Markets are amoral. They are. And so it's really just about, how do you maximize your own profit and externalize the cost onto others? So if you do that, you get bang for your buck coming and going. So if I can get you to spend beyond your means, and then I get credit for the sale and I get paid, then that's where my belief system is going to orient me. And so that's not necessarily a moral thing as much as it is a tendency for us to step outside of our morality, if that makes sense.
No, it does. That's why I think I was conflicted with it. I mean, I was glad I got out in the 2009 recession and went back. That would have been when I took it. So I love telling my students this, but I've dropped out of college 3 times.
Yeah.
That was between taking your class, which in like 06 or 07, and then I went back in 2009, started working the history department, got into graduate school, got my master's degree. But man, it was a lot of uncertain times, and then that recession hit, and like nobody came on the car lot for like 40 days.
Yeah, well, that alone is just an interesting story in greed and some of the stuff we're talking about, because if you look at it, they knew what was going to happen in advance. So the banks in particular actually saw this coming down the road, and what they did was they hedged themselves to protect themselves. But what they didn't do was they didn't adequately let the American public know. So by the time you're talking about 2008, 2009, that's sort of in the middle of the collapse. So you had this cascading failure, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, etc. What it did was and not a lot of people talk about this, is like even the money markets just fell apart, right? They broke the buck, meaning the safest investments you could have, you invest $1 now, 10 years later you get like $1.25, right? I mean, just super safe, steady investments. At that time, if you invested $1, you're getting 80 cents back. So the interest rates, though, then started to skyrocket, and they started changing the requirements for loans. So I know somebody who was trying to get a loan for a car during that time, and they wanted to charge her something like 19-20% on a car loan, and she had good credit. And I mean, it was crazy during that time, but a lot of that was the result of them gaming the system to their benefit.
Yeah, I remember it was. I mean, Cora and I bought this house 2 years ago, but it was I think just repercussions of that time. There were so many issues with us trying to purchase our business, which we bought our business in 2012. But they had started loosening. Commercial had gotten a lot more relaxed, I think, because we got financing really with more ease. But our bank before that time, and my bank since I was in high school, was Arvest, and they used to have the best customer service. And it's like literally, in hindsight, I kind of realized it's like, man, after that recession is really when you guys stop caring. It seemed like, because I remember we went in with substantial money down when we're going to buy the building we're at now, which we sold, by the way, so you won't be coming hang out there anymore.
Okay, yeah.
Other one will be twice as large.
Tell me where.
Yes.
We'll be there.
You know where Back to Basics is at? It's right across the street from campus. So
yeah, I think I know where that is.
Reasoner Lane, like where Tina's Gymnastics and like Ruby Tuesdays, all that.
Yeah.
So it's twice as large.
Good. Yeah.
But I mean, we went in with money down there, like, if you put $19,000 additional down, we might maybe could get something done. And we were just like, we banked here for this long. We have a lot of money down. In our opinion, I mean, we put $10,000 down, but in our opinion, it's like, this is a lot. Like, this is everything. This is all we have. We have good credit. I mean, I remember having a 760, and because Cora was younger and didn't have any credit at the time we got married, like, we couldn't do anything until she built her credit. That was another thing about, like, just the delays, like, by design. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, like, if you look at Arvest and some of these banks, and I'm just spitballing here, but that pattern that, we need more down, those kinds of things really come from the fact that they give you the style of community, but they don't really have the substance of it, because they're not beholden to the community anymore. They're beholden to shareholders.
Customer service is like a lip service.
Yeah, no, it's like when Exxon talks about how green it is. I mean, it's all to give the impression that they're doing something to, sort of satiate and even mollify the public so that they don't get totally outraged. But at the same time, it's one of the worst environmental destroyers on the planet. But we're green. We care.
I'm trying to think if it was Exxon that had leaked into the Gulf the first time I went there, and there were tar balls. Like, I got out of the Gulf.
When did you go down? The BP?
That would have been BP.
Because I was down for they called us in. I was doing stats for the BP spill. I was working as a consultant on that, and they were throwing money at us hand over fist. But I'll tell you something: when you're out on a boat and you see the ocean burning, it changes your life. I mean, it's crazy. But I was in Port Fourchon, down in Louisiana. We're mostly air monitoring and doing those kinds of things. And that was BP, but they were clearly at fault. I can say that now, I guess. But
yeah, man, that was the first time I'd been down to the Gulf too.
Yeah.
Tar balls, cool.
You see the dead fish and the agents.
We missed out on some of that, but it was like, when I was down there, it was like we're waiting for it to hit the coast type of a thing. We were in Pensacola,
Yeah, I think it was a little bit better there, but
Yeah.
it was nasty everywhere. I don't want to sugarcoat it. you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's everybody's becoming the collective consciousness seems to be more aware of these issues. Would you say?
Yeah.
I mean, you had the 16-year-old Greta Thunberg the other day, which was met with a lot of mixed fanfare, but I don't know. I'm like, I feel guilty. I agree with you, but I feel guilty.
Well, right. I think her outrage is what people are responding to.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair. She should be outraged. She should be, how dare you? Because there is a kind of intergenerational tyranny that's going on that we don't pay attention to. And that is, we're imposing taxes in the form of just health consequences alone, much less the environmental degradation, et cetera. We're imposing that on generations who have no say in our political system. We're just forcing that down their throats. And so I get the outrage. I mean, I have a kid. He's not. I mean, you know my kid. I worry about the world that we're going to leave him. This sort of corporatist, environmentally damaged.
Well, and it's that got enough. It got me thinking too, because I mean, I was like, with the outrage thing, that was a little bit of a turnoff. But it's like, at what point do we deny, everybody that's in this demographic that we're talking about, honestly, like non-economically viable people in our system? Because it's like, you got student loans, you got to get free and reduced, like whatever it is. All of these marginalized economic groups, I guess, would be a way to put it. But it's like, at what point do we allow their opinion to be participatory in the narrative?
Well, I think it always should be. I mean, that's the story that we tell if we hold true to American values. It doesn't say, give me your rich and your blonde-haired, blue-eyed on the, out there in the Statue of Liberty. It says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I mean, if we're truly oriented towards fairness and justice, they have to be part of the dialogue. And if they aren't, then I think we don't ask the question enough, what does that make us? What kind of people does that make us? Because, for instance, if you don't involve the poor in making decisions about poverty programs, then all you're doing is you're essentially engaging this sort of white affluent guilt, and you're never going to hit the target. I mean, there's stories, analogs, like if you look at what happened with some of the charitable work in parts of Africa, Christian groups would send over milk, powdered milk, and they can't process milk. Many are lactose intolerant. That's in part because of vitamin D absorption, et cetera. But how arrogant is it just to send that over because we know what's going to help you. This is what's going to help you.
Out of touch.
And it doesn't help. So I think if we truly believe in those American values of justice and freedom and equality, then they have to be always part of the dialogue. They have to be included. My fear is that what we've done is we're slowly trading what would be more democratic toward more plutocratic. So, for instance, we've gotten to the point now where it used to be one person, one vote. Now it's $1, one vote. And that means Bezos and Buffett and Gates, they have way more votes than I have.
I saw Bezos's yacht last time I was in Pensacola watching Panic. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like, stories high.
And they buy these luxury goods, but they don't buy things that drive the economy. Like, how many pillows can he really buy? How many gallons of milk will he really buy? Mm-hmm. Those are the things that kind of drive the economy, these sort of more common purchases. The yachts are just, I don't understand why somebody would even want something like that, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, does he live on that full time, run Amazon from that yacht?
Oh, yeah, that's just, it's just a measuring contest for rich people. I mean, look at me. And remember that if you add up Bezos, Gates, and Buffett, those three guys own more than the bottom half of the United States of America. So if we split the country exactly in half at that midpoint, they have more in assets.
I just want to know how Buffett's able to drink so much Coke.
Well, he's
Like that dude is unhealthy, but he is older and he's doing fine.
Well, he makes the argument that he eats like an 8-year-old. That's what keeps him young. That's his argument. I don't know. I'm sure
That's not working for me, man.
Yeah,
I get weird digestive issues, all sorts of stuff.
I know. I mean, that's I'm trying to cut back now, and
yeah, but that's one thing everybody always comments on, like his diet, and it's like, how's this guy do it
every morning?
Oh wow!
He gets McDonald's, and if the stock market's doing well, he gets there's a upgrade to the meal plan. He'll get the upgrade he'll spend $4 instead of $3.
The hash brown.
Yeah, he'll add the hash brown or something. I mean, that's Buffett.
Oh man, yeah. Well, okay. So on that token, should these individuals exist in society in general, a Western liberal democratic society, billionaires? This has been a question that's been going around. Should billionaires exist?
I mean, they do exist. I think they're a symptom of a bigger problem. If you look at other cultures and other societies, you have extraordinarily rich people. But they also tend to have a broader safety net, and they try to protect people. So if the question is, should they exist? I don't know if I have an answer to that, as much as I can say that the fact that we have so many is a problem. Because you got to figure, for each one of these people, they're trapping money. They're not freeing it up. And so currency is supposed to be like the bloodstream of an economy, right? You're supposed to spend it. And as they capture it, what they're doing is they're restricting our ability to actually get access to this stuff. So if you look at income, for instance, one of the stats I saw recently was something to the tune of 80% of all available income every month is going to people like that in the top 1 to 10%. And then we're scrapping it out for 20%, the remainder of the country. Right?
That's a fierce competition.
Right. And we can't compete. That's the problem. And even if you read Smith and some of these others, the system we have now is different than the one that Smith was talking about. The system that we have now is really more like casinos in the way that it operates. So should they exist?
House always wins type of a system.
So should they exist? I don't know. But the fact that they do exist is a problem. Or the fact that there are so many of them.
Yeah, that's I forget who was posing. Somebody sort of cult personality was posed that question a few weeks ago, and I was like, it's symptomatic of a much larger problem, like what you're saying.
Right. I mean, it's what we're running into is the features of the capitalist model that we adopt. I know I sound like a big Marxist when I talk that way, but really it's not. I'm not a Marxist, but the thing about Marx is he actually had his finger on the pulse of what was wrong with capitalism. He was an excellent diagnostician. His solution is totally screwed up. I mean, don't get me wrong.
But it was born out of what?
But it was born out of the Industrial Revolution
earlier.
And the poverty that he saw. Yeah. So, he's monopolization, for instance. We're seeing post-2008 collapse, like you were talking about. We didn't get more banks. We got fewer banks because the bigger banks came in and gobbled them up. And that's how they become less beholden to people in their communities. Now they're these huge corporate entities. The thing that's driving unemployment now that we aren't talking about that we should be is not immigration or undocumented aliens. That's just an issue meant to get people to yell at each other. The big issue is automation. And that's a tendency within the model to push for greater and greater levels of automation because you save on your labor side. You can destroy unions. You can do these things that allow corporations to save more money. But the biggest one he kind of warns us about is control of the state by the wealthy. And he says once that happens, they will begin to tailor laws that suit their interest over the interest of the broader public.
An oligarchy. In a sense,
plutocracy or plutonomy. I mean, and they recognize this. Citigroup put out that memo a few years ago where they were talking about, the biggest barrier to plutonomy at this point is that we still have one person, one vote. But we're moving away from that. At least that's my fear.
What do you think? Where does voting rights come into this narrative. Something.
Well, I mean, if you look at what happened with just the civil rights movement and the Voting Rights Act, that was, I mean, it's got a long and bloody and complicated history of just giving one segment of our society the right to vote. And then if you go back to the suffragettes and, universal suffrage.
I was lecturing on Seneca Falls and abolitionist movement today.
Right. And so, we've got a long history of trying to cut people out of political participation, which I think runs against our value system once again. And the problem we run into is that the political parties now seem to be trying to game the system in such a way that they disenfranchise people so that they can get a majority in any area. So that's gerrymandering, the issue with gerrymandering, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So if we go to voting rights, I think if we want a healthy democracy, everybody should vote. Everybody should be allowed to vote. I think it should be a national holiday.
That's interesting.
Everybody gets a day off. So that, because a lot of poor don't go and vote because they can't get the time off. They can't afford the time off. But everybody gets the day off. You go down, and when you get your driver's license, you're registered to vote, and everybody sees it as a civic duty now. It's not an inconvenience. When it's an inconvenience, it privileges the wealthy. When it is our civic duty, I think we get the government we earn, we don't get the government we want. And so that's how we earn it back, is we participate in the system, at least while we can.
And that encouraged participation would go a long way.
So if you look at, they've rolled back some of I mentioned the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. They've already started trying in some states to scale that back. So, for instance, some people thought about bringing back poll testing or poll taxes and these kinds of things that are.
What do you think those arguments are rooted in?
Well, they're rooted in kind of a mindset that if we want to maintain control, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to keep poor people and young people from voting. I mean, that's the easiest way I could distill it down. And so maintaining control for them becomes more important than doing the right thing and accepting the system for what it is, which is everybody gets to vote, everybody gets to participate. And so if you look at particularly minority communities, the very fact that Arkansas has a voter ID law indicates that there is a racism that's been institutionalized that prevents certain people from voting because they simply don't have the appropriate level of ID. I mean, that's what. Yeah,
it's not convenient, and some of the rules on primary voting and just you voted for this party,
right?
At this time, you can't change that next time.
Right.
Some of the steps, and I've seen just a survey from different states and how this might be institutionalized in different ways in different states.
Oh yeah, no, it's. I mean, it really bugs me that we aren't paying more attention to the fact that people are being systematically disenfranchised.
Do you think that, with what you're talking about, does voting require an age?
I think the age is okay. I mean, what is it now? It's 18 to register to vote. I'm okay with that. Although, going back to our earlier conversation, we still need to have a mindset that includes future generations whenever we make these large-scale policy decisions. I think there is a certain danger in letting my 9-year-old vote.
Well, I mean, I wonder if you could do something, for lack of a poor analogy. Are you familiar with the 3/5 compromise?
Yeah.
A horrible. Low point.
Right.
I rant incessantly about it when it comes up, but it's like, what if we applied something like that to a non-racist? Like, hey, kids ages 13 to 18 will receive that vote. Let's say however many vote. We extrapolate some data or a percentage from that.
Well, I think if we had a better public education system that truly was universally available, and we beefed up the civic educational system, then we could start talking about different voting ages. But the reason it's 18 is because that's the age of majority. That's when you're an adult, essentially. I think when you ask that question, I think of my 9-year-old, and he's a bright kid and everything like that. But if we asked him to vote, what's he going to vote based on?
It's impression. And yeah, I remember going to the fairgrounds when I was a kid and like doing a mock voting.
Yeah, and he's just going to vote by what he hears me say at home. I mean, that's what he's going to do.
Yeah, or like I've never heard of these people. I like this name the best.
Yeah, this candidate is pro ice cream. So that's
man.
So I think there is a little bit of a danger, and the age requirement right now is important. But if there was a stronger civics education program, and maybe we could hold votes nationwide in elementary schools and middle schools and even high schools, and then look at the results of those, and even poll them on what they consider to be the most important issues, and then include that into the policy process. That might be a way to get their voice in.
That's something, and honestly, it's that Greta Thunberg stuff that got me thinking about voting rights. And out the gate, I was like, I've been kind of back and forth on this idea of like, well, your brain's not fully developed until you're 23 to 25 years old. But then I realized like that doesn't even do it. I'm 32 and I'm learning more stuff than ever. Right. It's just, I think you're always, not everybody, but it's been an upward and onward story for me. I've just kind of leveled up continually. Mm-hmm. Now for people on that path, but I think people, what do you do with the people that aren't on that upward path or the uneducated, or it's just all these issues in voting rights is for marginalized groups. I'm all about it. And the only place I've ever been back and forth on it is the age thing. Mm-hmm. And developmentally speaking. And
honestly, until you asked the question, I never really thought about it, because I always think about these as more adult decisions. But yeah, at the same time, they have to have some input. But I don't know how that would work. Not reasonably, because I think they think about different things, because they are, for the most part, they're covered by their parents. You know what I mean? I mean, they don't make those, like, my kid does not make financial decisions for the household.
Yeah, there was, I saw a funny meme. It's like, about giving kids decisions or something. It's like, man, my 10-year-old, he's worried about a whole other, it's not even comparative. But at what point does it become? At what point do we make that transition of consciousness? And
right. I don't know. I mean, I agree. I don't think it happens at 18. I mean, it certainly didn't for me. I was, Mr. Fraternity, and I majored in beer for a long time when I was first, in school. I was okay in school, but I majored in parties. I mean, I'm not sure that I would want me at 18 voting. Much less some other body,
Yeah. Well, it's like kids could be the meme is that kids could be sociopaths trying to figure out long division.
Yeah.
Until they're, it's like, I was like, man, that one hits home. Long division was hard when I was a kid.
Right. But I know if I let my kid make all the financial decisions, we would have fish tanks in every room. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, I'm not sure that's. Wow. Now, as a parent, you try to, I can tell you that I try to make my son more aware. And in many respects, when we talk about it at home, I try to mute it a little bit, because I don't want him to get in that echo chamber and sort of go to school and repeat some of the things that I say, and get him in Dutch with a teacher or another student or another student's family. I mean, he's had enough trouble. He once mentioned that he didn't believe in evolution. And for some reason, that set a lot of people off, or not that he didn't believe in evolution. He believed in evolution and didn't believe that it was divinely created, so just to correct the record there. But there were friends he lost over that. They said, well, if you don't believe in God and you don't believe in evolution, or you don't believe in creation, then we're not going to be friends with you. And so, because he believed in evolution, but I had to have a whole conversation with him about, buddy, it doesn't matter if you believe in evolution or not. It just happens. And so you're on the side of the facts. You're on the side of what we understand to be true. And people who would ostracize you for that, you just got to learn to kind of dial it back if you want to be friends, and kind of mute that. And so that's, I guess my concern is, as I'm thinking about it, as I talk about it, is I don't want him to echo me, because in terms of the political spectrum, you can probably tell I'm hard left. I mean, I'm way out there on the left.
I'm gonna have
side of the
to
spectrum.
take notes on all this. Kevin, Corey, and I, when we, it's a real thing too. I mean, because I have some. I mean, I do not attend church. I would not identify with being a Christian, and saying that alone is controversial. Like,
Oh, yeah,
we were in a group of people, and somebody asked me what I believe, and I was like, well, have you ever explored the idea that maybe Jesus, like Socrates, may not have been a real person?
Yeah.
And they were just like, whoa. And I was like, I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm saying I'm deeply exploring that topic right now.
Or just count the number of messiahs that were around during Jesus's life. I mean, assuming he existed. I mean, that those are the kinds of things we ask. And I've even gotten notes from the school, and I don't blame them for this. But he said one of the things he wanted studying gifted and talented was evolution, and then Greek and Roman mythology, etc. I had to write a letter of permission for him to do that. And once again, I don't fault the teachers for doing this. What they're doing is they're covering themselves. But
is that our geography? Is that where we're at?
I think that's part of it. And I grew up here. I mean, I grew up in Arkansas, but I left. And I lived on the left coast out in San Francisco. And, I've traveled around the country. I've even lived on the East Coast for a short period of time. And eventually I came back. After graduate school and finishing the PhD, I came back. And I can tell you, this is a totally different state than when I left. I was gone for about 10 or 15 years. And something happened where I think we almost moved backwards. We regressed a little bit in our understandings of science. So, for instance, we have to deal with the issue of vaccines, and I had to have a whole conversation with him about how vaccines work and why we know they work and why it's important that you get vaccinated, because some of his friends will bring up, well, I hear that we're not supposed to get vaccinated, and it's against our religion, or it's against our Christian beliefs, or whatever, I mean, it's strange to me that the state is so different than when I came back.
That's man, I'm teaching Arkansas history now, and we just got through with progressive politics, and are going into the 45 to present era.
Sure.
And it's just going through the progressive era and how we were trying to deal with things or not deal with them or keep them from being dealt with. It's that we have an interesting history, but we are really anomalous to a lot of other states in our region, or like I like to bring up just because it's like our own, it's like, well, we're not quite in the deep South. I mean, maybe the Delta could be, but like I was listening to the Black lecture the other day, and he was talking about how, yeah, there was slavery in Northwest Arkansas and throughout the state, but like the culture, the life, the world of Northwest Arkansas and the Ozarks versus Eastern Arkansas and the Delta, not apples to oranges. It's not even the same. And you get into some of those deep South river states and on the Mississippi, and that culture is different. And you even see it like we have a lot of different like slavery in Arkansas. There's a lot of anomalous standouts. It's like, oh, it's not like that in any other state. Not like saying it's good or bad or more positive. It's a horrible institution. Right. But it's like, it's interesting because I think we maybe make stereotypes about some of that. It's the same in all of the southern states. Yeah,
no, I don't think I mean, there is a left component in Arkansas that's still alive and still vital. It just, when I lived growing up, I remember that as having more of a voice, and it was more reasoned. And I'm not talking about the woke left coasters. I'm talking about, people who believed that you play fair and you work hard to help others when you have, that it's okay to say that racism is a bad thing. And we should treat it as if it's a bad cultural practice and it's a bad set of institutional practices, but that seems to be changing now too.
Well, I said, man, I love, which just kind of reminds me of some trucker songs from the American Band album. Yeah. But I said that we've been talking about slavery all week and all last week. But it's okay to say those things, even if your dad or grandpa was an ardent racist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is the tiptoeing around, and it's taken me to be over 30 to kind of cut ties with some of that of like, yeah, no, I was raised this way or around this idea or exposed to this idea that we don't associate, they're different than just saying it like that, the marginalized group, it's like that is still systemically taught.
I know, and we run into it even once again with the kid. It's and that I find it interesting that all those cultural battles, like my mother put it this way, because she went to a big protest over the scaling back of abortion access. And she said, I can't believe that in my 70s, I have to fight this battle again. And if you look at pictures of me, and I actually have these and I show them in my classes sometimes, when I was a kid, I still remember segregation in the state. Now, it was outlawed. You weren't supposed to do it. It was against the law. But I remember going to medical doctors, or if you went into an emergency room or different kinds of facilities like that, they still had black waiting rooms. And you could not go into those. And our family, as a family, we were all just screw the man. We would go in and we would sit in the black waiting rooms. I mean, we would actively protest these things. So there are signs of me as a kid growing up in this state holding up signs, black is beautiful. And I come from a family of real hardcore leftist agitators. In fact, my dad used to say one of his proudest moments was when he was surveilled by the FBI because of his activities. But going back, that was a battle I remember fighting as a kid even, and my family was ardently opposed to any kind of racist ideology. And as we grew up, you could see kind of a shift where maybe this stuff maybe we're going to push this down. We know it's still there. It still sort of distills itself under the surface, but to come out as an openly avowed racist or Nazi or whatever, this was looked down upon. And it was clear that the public was responding and saying, we vote that out of our culture. Even though it's still there, we're going to vote that out. We don't want those ideas as having any viability. But then I came back and it's, wait a minute, we've regressed. You see, well, now in particular, you see just virulent, sort of open, unabashed kind of, we believe the white race is superior. And it's kind of like, wow, I thought we'd already fought this battle. I thought we were on the winning side, and it was, we were doing something about it.
It's just daunting. That there's a pattern to it, almost. That it just, and if you look at it on a larger, like somebody brought this up, we were talking about like international slave trade and stuff, and why after the international slave trade is outlawed, it's still a legal thing in the United States, but it's, we were still like one of the only Western nations with our ideas that were propagating that nation. I mean, Brazil and some other people in our hemisphere, but it's just, somebody brought up like, well, there's been slavery everywhere forever. And I was like,
that doesn't make it right.
Well, yes, that we weren't going to, but they were just saying like, because we were talking about abolition. I was like,
sure.
What sort of? Because I was like, it was Enlightenment 1715, but in 1840 we're making these arguments to say abolitionists are stupid. What do you think those arguments are? And it's like slavery's in the Bible, like just the things that people were saying, and it was in the newspapers and elsewhere. I can't, and I brought up the point. It's like, well, the black church used the same argument to abolish it. It's like, yes, slavery's in the Bible, and the Israelites made it out of Egypt, and that's what we're doing right now. So it was interesting. We were trying to talk about if any of the arguments classroom discussion had been repurposed by both sides in a different direction.
Sure.
But even to that, abolition in the 1840s, 50s, whatever it is, all of that, the slavery is an institution that existed in the ancient world and just the Mediterranean basin. And ever since.
Well, it's the same kind of argument they use against people who adopt those perspectives. They use it against almost everything. So slavery is just a natural condition for humans. And that's kind of what they're implying when they say it's always existed, it's always been there. And in fact, that's wrong. I mean, That's
Yes.
blatantly wrong. They use the same argument to make the claims about, all sorts of groups. It's just, I don't know. I have trouble getting my head around it, mostly because it so flies in the face of what is right and what is just and what we know to be just. So I've had students in class, if we're talking about slavery, who will say, well, what if it's a kind slave owner? Because you hear these sort of parables, there's this kind slave owner.
What if it's Uncle Tom's cabin, man?
The slave owner was so kind, and they educate their slaves and they get them decent medical care. And my response is typically more curse laden, but it's still slavery. The
Sally Hemings
is abhorrent.
Yeah. Well, and I use that same because are you familiar with Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson's slave mistress?
Yeah.
One of the questions I pose every semester is this rape?
Mm-hmm.
Does this person have a choice? Is it okay if this person loves Thomas Jefferson? Is it okay if Thomas Jefferson loves this person? And man, it gets everybody riled up, and I kind of enjoy it because I just play devil's advocate on it. But it's the opinions are definitely divided on whether or not it's okay, which is. I don't think it's okay personally.
No, she was a slave.
At the end of the day, it's like you guys can say whatever you want. She never had a choice. Therefore, to me, it is wrong.
Right. And I just, seeing these arguments rehashed and even seeing them play out at a national level, it really bothers me because I thought we were on the path, not to fixing the problem. I mean, the problem still existed, but we were on the path towards having a real dialogue that would remedy things, that we would work towards. You judge people by the character and their actions, not by what they look like. That we were kind of to the point where we could have a real conversation like adults and say, this is wrong. We don't want this rift in our country anymore. And I just, once again, it seems like we're regressing. We're going back. And I don't know if that is the death throes of those old ideologies. I don't know if it's a resurgence. I mean, who knows? I would turn to historians more than I would turn to a sociologist on that question, because the larger trend is historical. But in our culture now, the immigration, and I'm not trying to drag this out, but if you look at the issues over undocumented aliens, and the way we treat them, I mean, we live in a country now that has concentration camps. We just don't say it that way, but these are effectively concentration camps, and we justify it in the most ludicrous ways. Like, well, they shouldn't have come here illegally. Well, let's talk about why they come here. And if you go back to the 80s, essentially, most of these countries in Central and South America defaulted on their debt to the World Bank, which caused them to adopt austerity measures because that's the way the system works. So the bigger system at a global level in capitalism, if you're borrowing from the World Bank and you default on your debt and you can't even make your interest payments, what typically would happen is, and I'm sure I'm thumbnail sketching a lot of this, but if you look at what they did, they would force austerity, which means you cut social spending, you cut helping people out, and you put money into infrastructure that's supposed to grow your economy. So what that did was that created horrible conditions for all sorts of people in Central and South America that opened the gates for these, like if you see what happens in Nicaragua with the revolutions, et cetera, it creates a gap for the drug cartels to slip in.
Did you see the cartel in Mexico just last week? Or it's 2 weeks now. The Mexican government had taken El Chapo's son.
Mm-hmm.
And they got the Mexican government to give him back because they took all of these government employees. I forget what city it was in, but there was bombs going off everywhere. They shut down roads, pulled out Jeeps with 50 cows. This is all cartel.
Yeah, no.
It was a war zone.
Right. And they are bad. But we, in many respects, in our national policies, created the situations that allowed these gaps to occur that they fill. So when you see people fleeing north from that kind of situation, a lot of times, if we want to know who caused that, we need to look at ourselves, and we don't. We ignore that. We ignore that part of the story. We just assume that what was it, to quote the president, bad hombres, they're rapists and criminals, and that's not what's going on. I mean, what's going on is something that, if you take a broader sort of approach and you understand how the world systems operate, that we're driving, in many respects, the increase in this sort of undocumented immigrant influx that we have. Plus, where are the corporations in this? I mean, as I've stated, I'm sort of anti-corporate, but why aren't we locking up the Tyson executives?
Or the bankers that we bailed out?
But if you look at immigration in particular, and you look at people who are in the meat packing industry or the food industry more broadly, that's where a lot of these undocumented aliens go to get work.
That's a great, yes.
And so if you see these ICE raids, a lot of times it's management calling in on their workers to clear them out so that they can get a new batch. I mean, that's kind of the way they work. And so the question is, why aren't we holding these people accountable?
I mean, if you have knowledge of that going on, you're culpable, right? I mean, that's perfectly logical.
They advertise across the border in Spanish. I mean, hey, here's some jobs. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but I mean, like New York Times and other groups have actually clearly documented some of this, where they say that if you look at what's going on, we never seem to ask the question, at what point do we hold these corporate entities accountable? Because the ICE raid in, let's say, a meat manufacturing plant that arrests 200 individuals, well, they had to have gotten employed somehow.
Yeah.
Somebody hired.
What's the story? Yeah.
Somebody hired them. And if they're breaking the federal law by being there, then somebody broke the federal law by hiring them and paying them money.
I've observed that hole in the system since I went to work at Walmart DC at like 18, 19 years old, and there were undocumented workers there. It was the first kind of time I'd experienced it, because there was this one guy, his name was John Wayne. And his real name was Luis, I think. But on his name badge, it said John Wayne. And everybody kind of knew that he was, not on the up and up, or his John Wayne paperwork was for the time. So, but that's. I
mean, I think if we're going to be fair, then we need to lock up some CEOs. But we don't look to them. We don't even think about them.
Yeah, it's like an odd disconnect between the two.
Well, I mean, when you mentioned if you look at the banking collapse, if you go to that period 2007 to about 2010, how many of those cats that were involved directly in creating the crisis were actually locked up? No, we locked a few people up, but they weren't directly related. Just like Bernie Madoff's, he was running a pyramid scheme, et cetera. A couple got caught for doing different kinds of fraud or embezzlement, but they were sort of ancillary.
Tip of the iceberg.
And so where's the chairman of Goldman Sachs right now? I mean, he's still sitting pretty. The Jamie Dimon.
Maybe we'll find out all of these people were on like that list of 1,000 people associated with Jeffrey Epstein. It'd be sweet. Would be sweet irony.
I mean, odds are we won't find out if they will.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real tragedy. Is there's probably stuff that we just don't know about. But if when you look at it sociologically, some of this is my political position that's creeping in. But when you look at it more objectively, there are clear indications that the wealthy work together to make sure they maintain their wealth. And there's probably a lot of stuff that we don't always hear about that goes on. So if you look at just Enron, I'm not trying to drag this out, but if you look at a corporation like Enron, Skilling, who promoted the mark-to-market accounting practice, which ultimately gets them into trouble. There's also a series of cultural things that they had issues with. But when you look at that guy goes to the pen, gets out, and he goes right back into energy. I mean, like we don't, they aren't vilified the way we do the street dealer, and we don't understand and we don't contextualize the street dealer's choice, which is just as rational. I mean, if you've got nothing and no opportunities to make money except by dealing dope, the most rational choice is that you deal dope. we tend to treat those people as if they're horrible, evil criminals that need to be locked away forever. But people like Skilling, her masters and captains of industry,
and those people, getting out selling more dope again.
They may,
or getting out and going back into the energy business.
Right.
What's the difference?
What's going to harm us more? I mean, it turns out that these white collar criminals actually hurt us more in terms of financial costs and even lives than these street level offenders. But we don't go after them with the same zeal. IRS even officially announced that because they were held to task by, I think it was New York Times, but NPR did the story, held them to task and said, why aren't you auditing rich people? And they said, quite frankly, we just don't have the money and the time to audit rich people, so we're going to audit poor people more.
Oh, man.
I mean, the institutions are starting to operate in such a way that they reinforce the pattern of wealth. And in the meantime, poor people who have common interests develop these ideologies, like these racist ideologies, where the white Southern man actually has more in common with the African American man than he does with Bill Gates. He has more in common economically, but if the conditions are created where they compete and they fight it out, the wealthy people can just sit back and wait for things to happen.
That's a great point. I thought about even having, there's these two Middle Eastern students from Tech that go to the gym.
Yeah.
I talk to them more than anybody right now.
Yeah.
I'm at 20 years old, I might tell me everything about your culture, where you're from, what you eat. They're just interesting to talk to. And I identify more with them, even being somewhere else, just because, like, you're going to Tech, you're poor, I was poor, I went to Tech, we're here in the same state, I'm teaching about your part of the world in my Civ 1 class all the time. And it's like, I identify with them. I love talking to them. I don't even know what they believe or really. It's like, are you Christian or Muslim? It's not a question I've even really. I'm like, I don't really care because I don't identify with Christian. Therefore, I could not. Why would I even be upset with you being this or that or the other?
Good luck with it, right? I mean,
but I identify with them, even if they were Islamic or what have you. Yeah, it's like I got more in common with them than Bill Gates for sure.
And that's what I think. America is filled with embarrassed millionaires. They're millionaires, but they just don't have the money in the account just yet. And so they live like they're always benefiting from a system that in many respects is designed.
What do we call it? Keeping up with the Joneses or something like that? Yeah, somebody just brought that up yesterday.
I mean, way we put it in the strat class was I won't, it's got some curse words in it, but it's you want me to say
curse word friendly podcast.
Okay. So we live in a culture where you buy shit you don't want for people that you just fucking hate. That's our culture now, that you're buying things to impress others or to keep up with others so that you don't fall behind without paying attention to the fact that you may not even really need that purchase.
Or it brings no value to your life.
Right. There's nothing that you get out of it other than you get some sort of, the more formal way we talk about it is we call it economies of esteem. That you, for instance, a cup of Starbucks coffee, if you... I pick on students all the time when they show up with Starbucks, and I'll say, well, I thought you didn't have money. Well, I don't, but you spent $6 on a cup of coffee. Well, yeah, because, I just had to get it on the way in. I said, well, why couldn't you just have bought a pound for $6 and then you just make it at home with your water every day until you run out? Because that's as much as a pound of Starbucks coffee at Kroger. And they don't pay attention to the fact that part of the reason they're buying the Starbucks is because it's Starbucks, and it becomes a status marker. It becomes a way for them to say, look, I can waste resources. But we're so programmed in the system not to recognize that we're engaging in wasteful resource expenditures, that's what gives us esteem with others.
Well, and where I've started to carry guilt about that, like I got this nice plastic bottle. The kombucha's great. It does help my digestive health big time.
Yeah,
but we got this glass bottle. We got this plastic cap, and all the kombuchas in every grocery store, on it in every warehouse, and all of that waste and garbage and trash and the cold brew I get in the plastic cup or whatever.
Yeah, and it doesn't get recycled either. I mean, that's we're distracted from asking the more fundamental, central questions like, does Is there a corporate interest in truly recycling? Quite frequently, a lot of our recycled stuff that goes in the special cans does not actually get recycled. It just goes in the landfill as well. But as long as we live the illusion that it does, we're okay. As long as I live the illusion that when I buy something like an Old Navy shirt and it says Old Navy on it, I'm not really paying a markup to advertise their product. I'm wearing this shirt because it indicates to everybody else that I can keep up. I have resources that I can waste. So I am, in many respects, better than people who don't buy these products. We've got a real problem. I mean, we're so alienated from who we are that we mediate all our relationships through our consumption. And we are oriented toward consuming constantly. It really frightens me, once again, for my 9-year-old who's going to grow up in a world where we're still arguing about vaccines and whether or not the earth is round and our globe, and whether or not, racism is bad. And, we're still arguing about these things. And the tendency now seems to be shifting more towards that hyperconsumption rather than going back to, do we really need it?
Yeah.
Is this really of use in my life? So I do that Marie Kondo thing all the time. I mean, does this bring me joy?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't,
I've been able to get rid of a lot of stuff through that method, particularly when it comes to things like clothing, books.
Yeah.
Things it's like,
absolutely.
Am I going to read this again? Or, man, I've had this shirt since junior high. It's a great shirt. One thing I did start doing with some of my old shirts, I picked out a bunch of my old martial arts shirts and I gave them to one of our older kind of instructors that makes quilts.
Yeah, see, that's cool.
So now it's like, man, I got that quilt that he made me that I'll probably cover my kid up with.
Sure.
That, so it's like, but.
And that kid will keep it for the rest of his or her life.
And it's like repurposing the joy too. It's like, these 20 shirts don't bring me any more joy. But that time of life did. And now I've repurposed this nostalgic way or whatever. But that the art of tidying up, of just like creating these sort of mental markers to let go. Like, well, I can get rid of this for this reason. And then I find if I have like 2 reinforcements, then I can usually cut ties with it. It's a lot easier than it used to be. It's a practice.
No, and it's tough. I mean, because we're oriented to hoard and keep this stuff, mostly because we feel we need it and we'll use it at some point. And then I think we confuse needs and wants, and that's part of what drives that. And I see it in my kid. I need this toy, and it's right. Well,
I need these Harry Potter Legos.
Okay, buddy, I don't think you know what that word means. Need. I said, let's talk about what need means and what want means. And you see it. I see it in the college students all the time. This tendency to, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I don't fault them for it. They're trapped in a system that makes them do that.
That's a great point.
And I think that's part of our problem with social media and the esteem issues that are tied to social media and the depression that's tied to media, because you're always missing out. Everybody's always got a better life than you, but it's all an illusion. In the same way that buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks is an illusion. But it's like I identify more Taoist, Buddhist in my religious beliefs, and there's a famous story, and I don't want to take up too much.
No, we can wrap up whenever you want. I gotta go to the gym here in a bit, but we're totally good.
There's a famous Buddhist story about a great Buddhist master dies, and so he his acolytes are there, and there's one in particular that was his mentee, the one that was going to grow up to eventually become a great master himself, crying under a tree. And a couple of other monks come over and they say, "Brother, why do you cry?" And he says, "I cry because my master has died." And the other one steps forward and says, "But brother, death is an illusion and all of life is an illusion." At which point the young acolyte under the tree crying says, "But this is the saddest illusion I've ever experienced." And so the point being is, these illusions take on a reality of their own, and that we never recognize, at least as a culture of consumption. I think that's scary to me. We never really truly understand the degree to which we buy into something that takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And the reason it's scary to me is because we stop paying attention to the fact that we control all of this. At any point in time, we could create a society that was racially equal, gender equality. We could create a society that has universal health care because we truly value life. We don't have the style of a culture of life. We truly value life. We could change our system to be more environmentally friendly. We could do all of this. We could get rid of student loans. We could do all of this as long as we all sort of get on board and agree. And so going back to the original question, student loan question, part of the reason I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to work is because we all live in this illusion that tells us that we have to do things a certain way. And his idea is so radically different from that illusion that we live in.
They're too far apart.
Right. And so we lose control over that. And that's scary to me because at any point in time, we could change anything and make it a better place. We could.
That's a great point of optimism because it's easy to talk about all this stuff and get super negative and bogged down and we can't fix it, or just be so, just kind of write it off. Well, yeah, it's a thing, like what are we going to do? But man, that's why I love sitting down and having these types of conversations. And I think they're of value. One, they're educational for me. I get to sit down with a lot of smarter people in my mind, or just different people that, man, shed light on something I hadn't thought about, so, but, man, I appreciate you coming out.
Hey, no, I thanks for having me.
Hey, yeah. It's a nice little full circle. Cause I remember, I thought of this earlier when you were talking about drinking beer or something, but I remember you making a remark in sociology years ago about being a schnapps or was a Scotch man, an acquired taste.
It is an acquired taste.
Yes, I don't know why that analogy stuck out, but you were kind of talking about getting conditioned to something.
Yeah,
and it stuck with me from years ago, but I've used that
because Scotch is disgusting the first time you try it.
I remember drinking it like I hadn't even had Scotch at that time, because I was like probably 19 years old when I first ran into you. But I remember the first time I drank it wreathing, I was like, oh, okay, but it'll be an acquired thing if I keep doing it.
Keep doing it, and sooner or later you'll learn to talk about all the nuance.
Yes. Well, man, let's go ahead and wrap it up. I appreciate you coming out, and maybe we can sit down again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, man. Signing off.